So I just decided to simplify my title and just call it Space, Culture, and Civilization. And the I have there's an overview of how all of that fits together. And there are these little icons at the bottom. If you don't recognize any of those icons, it means you probably read in your spare time rather than waste your life on these social media platforms. So that's just my little opinion about that. But I just want to remind you, as of this minute, there's a rover and a helicopter on Mars. All of these countries have spacefaring capabilities. And, it's a fascinating time. We have active probes, the sun, Mercury, Venus, moon, asteroids, comet, Jupiter, the Kuiper belt. We're nearing 6,000 exoplanets with Goldilocks planets among them, those that are at the right distance to have liquid water instead of it freezing or evaporating. The birth of a private space enterprise. This is all happening now. We have telescopes that can detect gravitational waves from colliding black holes in galaxies far away. And of course, there's pretty much always a killer asteroid that's headed our way. But that's not what this topic, my presentation is about. I shouldn't laugh, but just a reminder that we spacefaring nations one day should get together and figure out how to deflect asteroids because it's not good enough for that to happen only in movies. So I just want to give you a sense of uh, things people have said who believed they understood the future but did not. And it's a humbling reality check on whatever any of us might be saying about our future. So here's one. In the year 1900, it is scarcely possible that the 20th century will witness improvements in transportation that will be as great as were those in the 19th century. Now, that's just embarrassing. Okay. This was the head of the New York Central Railroad whose job it is to think about transportation. And 3 years after this, the airplane would be invented. Okay. And 50, 60 years later, we'd be putting spaceships in orbit. Okay. So here he is thinking he knows what's going on. Here's one: man will not fly for 50 years. I wonder who said that. Oh, Wilbur Wright to his brother Orville Wright in 1901. They would invent the airplane in 1903. So, I'm fascinated by this disconnect between what people think they know about the future and what the future actually becomes. Okay, uh, man will never reach. Now that we know how to fly, okay, because this is 1957, man will never reach the moon, regardless of all future advances. Okay, this is an engineer saying this, and he says this. How many? 6 months? 8 months before Sputnik is launched, which births the space industry and space program. Okay. And of course, within 12 years, we would land on the moon. And so, by the way, now that we had a lunar program, now people overpredict. That's an interesting one. A manned lunar base will be in existence by 1986. The futurist. Okay, so now they say yes, we have gone into orbit, we're on our way to the moon, and we're going to be there to stay. They had no understanding of the geopolitical forces that were driving it. They just thought we're doing it because we're explorers and we're human. It's in our DNA. There's other forces that have to be operating for that to happen. Here's one. By the year 2000, 50,000 people will be living and working in space. Once again, another engineer, Robert Trump. And yeah, so I was just going through these quotes. Um, man will not fly for 50 years. Just an embarrassing quote by Wilbur Wright to his brother Orville, and they would invent the airplane 2 years later. Uh, man will never reach the moon. That's embarrassing too. So what are these people thinking? They don't understand the pace that technology can grow beyond their own imaginations. And a manned lunar base
will be in existence. No, that did not happen. Now they're over predicting, over predicting. Another over prediction. By the year 2000, 50,000 people will be living. No, yes, we had a space station, but in that year, I think the number was six. No, three people were living and working in space, not 50,000. And so I want to describe space as culture because space is has such a force of influence on our hearts and on our minds and on our sense of belonging that we have good evidence that when a country goes into space, it's a binding force for everyone. You've seen this firsthand in India with the successes of ISRO. So I'm going to show you back. This is the V2 rocket on the left, which is our first rocket, basically. Okay, of course, it came out of the Second World War. Notice that rocket had these big fins on it. Okay, so that became everybody's understanding of what a rocket should look like. And then cartoons had all the rockets had fins. Look at that. This is the Belgian comic strip Tintin, and there's a rocket there. They're ready to get into that rocket, and it's got fins. So influential were these fins that cars in the United States had fins. Okay, this is it affected design. It affected, yeah, those fins surely makes the car go faster. People would emotionally think upon looking at it. That's probably the peak fin size, but then the fins got smaller once we announced the Apollo program and the rockets no longer had big fins, the fins got smaller and smaller until there are no fins anymore because the actual rockets didn't use them. So, and there's the Saturn V rocket. It does not look like the V2 rocket. It's a different design, a necessarily different design to enable the achievements that it brought about. By the way, when the United States went to the moon, people wrote songs about space. It affected culture. Fly Me to the Moon. You may be familiar with some, if not all of these. David Bowie's Space Oddity. That's ground control to Major Tom. You might have known that. So the Beatles had two songs. Moon Dance, okay? Rocket Man by Elton John. It became part of our culture, part of our culture. And it also helped us think about what tomorrow would look like. Tomorrow, this is some artwork that shows the old world over in the left and new cities inspired by space. And I think they went a little overboard there because if you zoom in on these are people floating. Maybe there's a gravity problem in the city there. I don't know. Or they have rocket packs, perhaps. I don't know. But that's the future that they were imagining. Surely we'd all be living that way by the year 2000. And so this is the album art from the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. That movie was made in 1968. It's affecting the film industry, affecting the music industry. Okay, India has a huge movie production industry. Okay, we like some of that gets here from Bollywood, and imagine if science fiction became a huge part of that culture, and that it's transformative to how people think about the world. Here's another vision of the future. I'm a little disappointed because there are hardly any trees in this future. Back then, trees were just annoyances. Let's just put fancy structures. But still, it's a sense that people were thinking about tomorrow. Uh, Detroit, who would have thought? You'd imagine Detroit being a city of tomorrow, Detroit in New York. Again, these are people in the 1950s and 60s thinking about the future like in the year 2000. I lived through this, the World's Fair of New York City. I'm old enough, I'm an old man. I was a child, but I remember full well in 1964, the World's Fair. Everything about it, nearly everything about it, was future. That the Earth sitting there tilted on its axis with three rings, resembling John Glenn's three orbits around the Earth. And the international participation, it felt so good. It felt so promising for a future of peace and tranquility and exploration. Uh, I also note that the space frontier attracts all the sciences, all of them. Obviously, astrophysicists, but of course, physicists, geologists, chemists, biologists, and especially engineers, and all the different branches of engineering. Now, how would it do that? I'll tell you. Okay. Let's say an authentic geologist goes in front of your classroom and says, "Who wants to discover rocks on the side of the volcano that just erupted on this part of the world?" And people say, "I do, I do, I do." Then I stand in front of them. They say, "Who wants to explore rocks on the side of a volcano on Mars?" I win. Okay. Uh, the people who go under the water, okay, marine biologists, I'd say, oh, who wants to go in a submersible and explore new species of life in the bottom of the Indian Ocean? So I do. Then I get up and I say, who wants to explore alien life that could be swimming in under the ice oceans in the moons of Jupiter? Okay. So my point is that space is a very powerful force of attraction to stimulate interest in the STEM fields. And that interest does not go unrewarded nationally. Okay. This is the GDP per capita in the United States across 10-year increments from 1950 through 2020. The economy has been growing in every decade. This is the percent change on the right hand column. Okay. And okay, that's obviously in is that uh, billions GDP? No, no, sorry, GDP per capita. That's in dollars. So I want you to notice that the highest rise is there, 34% rise, significantly higher than any other decade. And that's the decade we went to the moon. That's the decade. That's the decade when computing became common in the scientific community. And the business world started uptaking the fruits of this research. Okay, so it's not just space alone, it's the impact that space has as it moves through your economy. And so I'm claiming there are a lot of things that contribute to GDP, gross domestic product. I get that. But I don't think it's just coincidence that when an entire country wants to go to the moon and everybody's inspired and children in elementary school say, I want to be a scientist. You didn't need special programs to excite people to want to think about science. They came running to it. So, also, how many people know this? All right. We're going to the moon between 1968 and 1973. And oh my gosh, what do you realize what happened over those years? All of this happened. There's the whole Earth catalog came out, thinking about Earth holistically. The first domestic and international Earth Day was 1970. We created a new agency because the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that cared about the relationship between the air and the oceans, the environmental protection. By the way, other countries would have similar legislation following this in the years to come. The Environmental Protection Agency, Clean Air Act, Doctors Without Borders was founded, not in the United States, in Switzerland, but would they have called themselves Without Borders? Where does that idea come from? Because we all grew up with schoolroom globes and you see borders on countries. How do you get a without border mentality unless you see Earth from space? DDT was banned, a Clean Water Act, leaded gas was banned. All of this happened while we were going to the moon. Could have happened earlier, it could have happened later, but it didn't. We had a change in our consciousness. there was like a firmware upgrade in the human awareness of the value of Earth. Earth. We're all in this together. How, what price should that be worth to you? And you got that for free on the exploration of space. There's the globe we see in our in the back of the on the shelf in your classroom. We go into space. Is this what you see? No, it's not. Of course, it's not. You see an oceans and clouds and land. It is not what we are taught in the school. So this is a force of enlightenment. Enlightenment. No other way to put it. Now let's talk about the space frontier. Okay. By the way, is everyone still seeing the slides? Is it working out in this way? Everybody?
Yes, it's a great.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Now here we go. Um, the space frontier is expensive. It's dangerous, and it has risks. Yes, it does. It does. But watch the sequence here. You start out with a space program funded by governments, okay? NASA in the United States, JAXA, Japan Exploration Agency, Japan, the European Space Agency. You have Indian uh, Space Research Organization. They start out as government. That fosters a space industrial complex that serves those needs. But ultimately, if you want this to become routine, it would become commercial space, where it's a true consumer industry. We have communication satellites and weather satellites and all other things people might do in space. Tourism, okay? So this is a progression from what people would start doing to what ultimately could happen. And you don't get commercial space by accident. You need you need the governments to see that that's a good thing and put in rules that and freedoms that will enable it and further develop it. I just want to show you how far we've come. This is the cockpit in Apollo 11, which went to the moon, and then the space shuttle, 1982, a little more streamlined, right? Fewer buttons, okay, 1982, and then SpaceX with Elon Musk. Yeah, there we go. That's what we. Now there's a cockpit, okay, that we should be talking about. So when private enterprise and time are in your favor, you things modernize, things become more efficient. You should know that the space industry worldwide is huge, huge. It's much bigger than that of any one country's budget. Okay, so nearly five. In fact, this current year, it's expected to pass a $500 billion in this current year, 2023. And so I'm going to show you some NASA numbers. Very simple, right? Here it is. Sorry. Very important. We have this Artemis sequence happening where we're going back to the moon, as you may know. Artemis 1 was just a ship that went to the moon to remind ourselves that we can still do that. Coming up later next year, we're going to send a crew to the moon, but they're not going to land. And Artemis 3, they're going to land on the moon. Where on the moon are they going to land? On the South Pole. The South Pole. Now, why is that interesting? India certainly knows why it's interesting. On the South Pole, the sun never gets very high on the horizon. That's true for the poles here on Earth as well, of course. If it doesn't get very high, it turns out there are bottoms of craters. Looking at that, the crater, that big crater in the middle, the sun never shines on the bottom of that crater because the crater rim shadows it. And if the sun never shines there, then comets that have hit the moon in the past will have water molecules that land all over the surface. If it lands where the sun shines, it will evaporate and go away. The sun doesn't have an atmosphere, it doesn't keep the gas. If it landed in the shade of the poles, It stays forever, forever. And that tells you that if you're going to pitch tent on the moon and hang out, and you're going to pick a place to do it, and you need water for your survival, the South Pole is the place to do it. Okay. And of course, India knows this. So, here, so there. So, if you look under the soft land, it says India in the original slide. There it says India becomes the fourth country to land softly on the moon. That's not the news story. It's true, but the news story is no other country has soft landed near the South Pole. And that's a frontier place on the moon. To me, that's the headline. Not that you're the fourth country to get to the moon at all. Okay. So because now, and we will follow this, and with the Artemis Accords signed by India when Prime Minister Modi came through the United States, when I had the privilege to meet him, um, those accords says for it's an accord among spacefaring nations that we will share data, that we will use space for peaceful purposes, sharing data, and help each other advance the frontier. So now that you're there first, and you're going to find information about the South Pole that will be interesting for other countries, so they can more sharply design their experiments and their plans. So that's that. Now take a look at this. The ISRO budget is 1.5 billion, and the full budget of India is nearly 500 billion. So that's 0.03% of the national budget. Anyone who says, why are we spending in India? Why are we spending money in space when we still have rampant poverty? To that, I reply one, India had rampant poverty before any money was ever spent on ISRO, before ISRO even existed. So you can't look to space interest and say that's bad because we have poverty. You can't connect these two. First. Second, more importantly, 99.9% of the Indian budget is spent on everything else. So if you're trying to solve poverty, you don't go into that 0.03% and say, give me some of that money so that we can solve this problem. You got all the rest of the money in the pot. Now, that 0.03%, is that large? Is that small? Let's see the United States. NASA budget 25 billion. As you'd expect, it's larger. Our federal budget is 6 trillion. Divide those, it's 0.04%. It's still it's still small. We have 99.96% of our budget to spend on other things. So people, of course, we have poverty as well. And we had poverty in the 1960s while we were going to the moon. We have less poverty today, abject poverty. Homelessness is still a problem, but if you look at the numbers, they're better than they were 50 years, 60 years ago. And we have the rest of the budget to spend on other things. And my final point is that, as we know, and as the good ambassador highlighted, in the Indus Valley in India, in that whole region, and the Hindu traditions, math and science goes way back. Okay, from the invention of zero, AD 200, right on through other major advances and understandings in the sciences. Now, here's an interesting fact. We have the Muslim community based in Baghdad, in that 500, 600-year period, was the golden age of Islam, okay? Where there was also major advances in math and science and engineering. And what I like about this slide is, I don't know how many people know this, but okay, yes, the zero came from India, and so did our numeral system. Okay, today we call them Arabic numerals, but they began in India, and in the golden age of Islam, they call them Hindu numerals. Okay, this and with the reason why it ended up landing with Arabic numerals is because once the zero and the numerals got to Baghdad, um, an entire system of math uh, rose up out of that. Um, arithmetic was developed further, as well as especially algebra. Okay, algebra itself is an Arabic word. And so, what I'm saying is, advances all around the world are always using the advances from other people, uh, uh, other other creative people in times of creativity, where you're supported by systems of governance, systems of culture, and given the very rich and diverse cultural uh, uh, um, demographics throughout India, to tap the brilliance of everybody is exactly what you're going to want going into the future of space and the future of science entirely. Because you know something? No one culture, no one country owns science. No, no. The value of pi does not change at passport control at the airport. Okay? Everyone has access to discovery, and the opportunities we give to everyone to participate in that will make the difference for everyone's future. And I now yield my time to that's the answer. Let me go stop sharing. Did I do that? So there we have it. I hope everyone heard me or saw the slides, and I don't know if I talked for too long there.